And welcome to Schmitt tonight. Our country is devolving at a very rapid clip right now. Our institutions corrupted for political purposes. Our courts and Justice Department weaponized against dissenters of the ruling class. The fabric of our Constitution being shredded for short-term political gain. And if you believe that politics is downstream from culture, you better look out, because culturally, things in this country are far worse. A clearly destructive anti-American agenda has been embraced by the ruling class in this country, poisoning millions of Americans with the idea that they're victims of some manufactured oppression. The absolute worst thing that you could do if you want to maintain a strong, symbiotic society. But of course, that's not what the people pulling the strings actually want. The real goal is to radically change this country, move away from freedom and capitalism to a system much easier to control at the top. Their method to achieve this, a divide and conquer scheme designed to sow chaos. A cultural revolution has begun against traditional America. We can all feel it. Orchestrated by people who hate this country, and none of this is happening by mistake. It is the furtherance of an agenda set in place by the first American president ever elected, intent on weakening his own country. When Barack Obama was elected in 2008, 47% of Democrats and 78% of Republicans said that they were proud to be Americans. Today, it's 26 and 58, respectively. That was completely by design. You can't radically change a country unless most of its population are convinced that the country is broken. Barack Obama, the cultural Marxist who now lives in a $15 million house in the whitest town in America, began the process that's now coming to fruition by poisoning his own country on the world stage, something that did not go unnoticed by Republicans.
Barack Obama was deliberately weakening America. He made an intentional effort to humble us back to size, as if to say, we no longer need to be so powerful because our power has done more harm than good. A man was elected who condemned America for having, quote, arrogance and the audacity to dictate our terms to other nations. A man who apologized for America and bowed pitifully to foreign leaders. A man willing to abandon our allies and make concessions to our enemies, and worst of all, willing to make historic, devastating cuts to our military.
And then the president began what I've called an apology tour of going to various nations in the Middle East and criticizing America. I think they looked at that and saw weakness.
A little recap of what those 8 years were like. Obama's 8 years emboldened the worst actors in the world, many of which are aligning against this country right now, which is why you're hearing so much about the threat to the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. Whether you want to believe it or not, Barack Obama is still the president of the United States. It's certainly not the withering, confused old man in this video who's completely being marginalized at his own event. Obama even told us that he was going to do this. You remember this.
Arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony. Wow. I'd be fine with that.
And that's exactly what he has. But by far the most damaging legacy of the president who sabotaged this country is the cultural rot. The great irony of Obama was his election was supposed to signal the end of black oppression in the United States. After all, how could a racist country elect a black president? And so we did. Obama destroyed John McCain in 2008, and the left rejoiced. White guilt liberals could finally sleep at night. The country had repented. Many assumed finally there would be peace, if only we knew. Race would become the central divisive theme of the Obama White House, beginning with Trayvon Martin. The agenda was clear when Obama and his allies in the press worked to portray Martin's Hispanic killer, George Zimmerman, as white, or at least white Hispanic. Even the media critic at the Washington Post couldn't resist. Why did the New York Times call George Zimmerman white Hispanic? Pointing out that had Zimmerman done something honorable, he would have just been called Hispanic. But to divide the country, George Zimmerman needed to be white. The agenda became much clearer when Michael Brown was shot and killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri. rocket fuel for the burgeoning Black Lives Matter movement, a critical component of Obama's vision of destabilizing and redesigning this country. Michael Brown is still somehow a martyr today, despite the fact that Obama's own DOJ declined to charge the cop who killed him because it was so clearly an act of self-defense. Brown, clearly a violent young man, attacked Officer Darren Wilson and tried to get his gun. Officer Wilson was the second person that Michael Brown had attacked that day. And yet he continues to be viewed by the political left as some kind of hero or martyr. To sow division, unrest, instability, that instability has permeated nowhere more than Chicago, a city soaked in the blood of black-on-black violence, thanks to the left's mission to destabilize this country. This week, Chicago elected its next saboteur. Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson even invoked Obama and Michael Brown the morning after he won.
I'll never forget the profound words of former President Barack Obama, when he said that if he were to have a son, he would have looked like Trayvon. And then you fast forward to Mike Brown, Freddie Gray, Quantonio LaGreer here in Chicago, who was having a mental health crisis, and the only equipment on the scene were guns.
He just listed off 4 names of black young men who might have been injured or died in questionable circumstances with police. One of those 4, one of which was clearly at fault for his own death, as we now know. But Brandon Johnson did not mention any of the thousands and thousands of young men who have died since his political party and himself started screaming to defund the police. Just a small, inconvenient stat that none of America's race baiters want to talk about. Their ideology is slaughtering the community they're pretending to protect because none of this is about protecting the black community. The real goal, of course, is weakening a fully functioning country that they despise. And it starts with indoctrination, making people think that a great country is somehow irredeemable.
We've seen with horrifying clarity the cost of systemic racism.
We have a system that is built on systemic racism, and we have to dismantle that system piece by piece.
Racism is systemic, it is structural, it is pervasive.
Racism in America is endemic. It is foundational.
America has a long history of systemic racism.
The battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country.
All part of a plan. They run around making vicious, destructive claims that are demonstrably untrue, and they get away with it because the left owns the moral high ground in this country. This is why their cancerous ideology continues to spread around the world despite always failing, because it's very difficult to push back on a group trying to obtain power by claiming that they're trying to help marginalized people. So now you have transgender people dancing naked for little kids, men beating women to a pulp in a boxing ring to cheers from a politically correct crowd, cities full of homeless drug addicts defecating on sidewalks, handing out free drugs for drug addicts, police officers retiring in droves, a wide-open southern border, and our adversaries chomping at the bit, watching as this great country self-destructs. Nobody needed to take down America. It's going to take down itself. And there's no way to stop it because we are self-destructing out of virtue. We're living in very chaotic times, and it's being completely manufactured. Every single crisis this country faces has been created for political purposes. The left has blown up a very stable world order, weakened the greatest and most just world power in history, and poisoned the culture of a once beautiful coalescent nation so they can attempt to implement an ideology that has failed every single time it has been tried.